Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the PFN Scouting Podcast. We are heading into week 5 of the college football season, and we are here to talk about the prospects. And specifically today, we are going to go through our 1 through 5s wide receiver rankings between me and Ian. I think that we will have some differences here. We have kept our lists a surprise from one another. We're also going to get into some of the honorable mentions because this is a very good wide receiver class. It might not have all of the ridiculously talented receivers that we have seen in prior classes, but there is so much, there's so much to choose from in this wide receiver class. There's so many shapes and sizes, and we don't normally see a class that is so different from one another. And I think that will make this class a lot of fun to discuss because it will really, I think, come down to, in the end, how you look at the different archetypes of wide receivers for who you choose. But with that said, Ian, I always have to ask, how are you doing?
Doing good, man. I love the imagery to lead us off. I love that adding that color to the report there. No, man, it's been good. It's been good. I know ahead of the last podcast, we wanted to talk about wide receivers because you had Keon Coleman from the previous week. You had Marvin Harrison Jr. playing through the injury, right? So many different storylines. We wanted to hit that too, but we talk way too much. We've established that. You only fit so many items of discussion in a 35 to 40 minute podcast. So we had to maintain some self-discipline. But today, we set aside some time to go through the entire wide receiver group individually. And it's an interesting class. Like you said, not a dominating group, through that top 10, but I feel like this top 5 to 6 group is really, really good. And then you have a ton of different archetypes, like you said, in the dozen to 2 dozen range even. And there's a ton of depth as well, too, that's going to be unearthed later on in the cycle. So very excited to talk about these guys.
And let's get right into it. Who is your number 5 wide receiver right now? We're going 5-1, by the way. There should be no secrets about who number 1 is going to be for either of us. But we are going to keep the surprise down to number 2. So let's get it going.
It's tough, man, because number 5, right away, we're starting with a really difficult decision for me personally. There were 2 guys that were basically 5A and 5B. They were that way entering the year for me, and they continue to be that way now. Both in the Pac-12, Washington's Rome Odunze and Oregon's Troy Franklin. So I leaned Franklin for my wide receivers 5 spot. But again, they're really close. I think for them, it's up to that just goes to show Odunze is one of my honorable mentions. So he didn't quite crack my top 5, but he was right there. And I think that top 6 group in particular is kind of separated from the rest on my board anyway. But yeah, for me, it really boils down to personal preference, right? I think both these guys 6'3", so they got size, they got length. I think both of them can function as independent separators in the offense too. I think Odunze, again, 215, so he's got quite a bit of poundage, almost 30 pounds heavier than Franklin. So you're getting a better rack threat. He's got the physicality, but he's pretty slippery for his size too. Really good, smooth catching instincts, really good flexibility, body control when he's working beyond his frame. But Troy Franklin, I think, is just as good in that department. I mean, the way that he can just suddenly extend, and he's very good at making high difficulty adjustments at a moment's notice. So he can extend beyond his frame. He's got a great catch radius. And I think for me personally, right, in the modern NFL, we've seen how lighter receivers are starting to find more success because they're being enabled to a little bit more. Troy Franklin, I think he's up to 187 pounds now. But to me, he's a little more explosive than Odunze, a little faster than Odunze, a little twitchier than Odunze. And I think in space, I think the things that you can do with him, you can use him on motions, you can put him in the slot, and he can function on the boundary too. But for me, Troy Franklin, the dynamic ability, the versatility is just a little bit higher for me. And that's what I value on my board. So it was really close. I didn't want to choose between them. It's like having to choose your favorite son, right? You don't want to do it. But, both of these guys are very good prospects. To me, Troy Franklin's heightened versatility and the dynamic ability, that gave him the edge for me at wide receiver 5. But again, I think I'd take both these guys in round 1 too. They're both very good prospects in my opinion. But number 5 on my board right now is Oregon's Troy Franklin.
Yeah, I got to disagree with you a little bit here. We have disagreement right away. Neither of those 2 are in my top 5, which, some people might find interesting. And I particularly found it interesting how you said that smaller or slimmer wide receivers are beginning to find more success at the NFL level. And there is a bit of a slim reaper in this class. He plays for Texas. His name is Xavier Worthy, and he is my number 5 wide receiver. Now, I understand what you were saying with Troy Franklin. I am a Troy Franklin fan as well. I don't like him, I think, as much as you might like him. I think that the separation ability is there. I do like the explosiveness that he has. I think that he could become a little bit more efficient as a route runner, particularly on stop routes. It's a lot of length to try to slow down. I think when you are breaking in, breaking out, and doing, more obtuse breaks, I think that he is really good at getting in and out of those, but want a little bit more start-stop in his game. Rome, for me, is, kind of the bigger play kind of guy, somebody who is a bit more of a possession guy, and that might sound like a bit of a dichotomy, but I promise you it's not. And the possession side of things is a guy who can catch the ball over the middle of the field and then make a play with the ball in his hands afterwards. That size is a legitimate weapon. But I look at the NFL game today and how much quickness has to do with it. And, small receivers for me aren't always my favorite, but a guy like Xavier Worthy, who shows surprisingly good contact balance as a 165-pound wide receiver, it's at 6'1", I like that. And then he has that flexibility and that seamless transition in and out of breaks as well. I think that the one thing that should worry people and worries me, even with him being at number 5, are the hands.
Yeah,
the hands are a bit suspect. I mean, there was a particular play against Alabama on the goal line where he comes in short motion and acts like he's going to run a shallow cross. And then he just stops on a complete dime and opens up to the outside and completely separates from the best cornerback in college football. And the ball, it just doesn't come down with it. And it was outside of his frame. It wasn't the best pass in the world, but it's a pass that an NFL wide receiver should catch. And 9 times out of 10, if not 10.
There were catches last year, like catches that he's made in the previous 2 years, where he's that vertical threat. I mean, he has legitimate 4.3 speed going down there. The long strider speed is insane, and he can make circus catches down there, diving beyond his frame. With impact of the ground impacting him too. And it doesn't matter. Like, he's shown that he can make those catches. It's just the easy ones where he does everything right. He separates. All you gotta do is guide the ball in. Those focus drops, man, they are frustrating for him. He would have made my top 5 probably if he had a higher hand grade as well. He was in that group as well. But I mean, you mentioned it. You hit the nail on the head. Beyond having that elite speed element too, like, this is a guy who can legitimately retract and extend his strides at will, insane flexibility and control with that speed. And that's a really dangerous thing. So this is a ranking that I might look back on and say, I should have given him some leeway. But the hands is a little bit concerning, because you can do everything right, but the most important thing on every rep is converting at the catch point, making it all matter. And right now, he's not a liability in that area by any stretch. But you look at guys like Troy Franklin, Rome Dunn.
He is kind of a liability in that respect. It's just, for me, it's how much does it matter? I look at a guy like Jerry Jeudy, who obviously went in round 1, mid-round 1. I watched him working out in the offseason before he was drafted. I watched his private coaching sessions. It wasn't just him. It was a bunch of wide receivers that were there. He had the worst hands out of everybody. I mean, we're talking about catching against air and it hitting his hands like bricks. I went and I saw Jahan Dotson's pro day, and it sounded like the ball wasn't even touching his hands. I mean, that young man has some of the best hands I've ever seen. And it's clear when you watch these guys in practice how good or bad their hands are. And I think that that's kind of the guy that you have with Xavier Worthy. It just depends on what kind of plays he's able to make you not forget about the drops and not care about the drops, but to care about the drops a lot less. Like a guy like Kadarius Toney is somebody who is underwhelming on the field and then also dropping passes. Whereas a guy like Amari Cooper early on in his career was dropping passes, but he was also going for 1,100, 1,200 yards as a rookie. I think that that's the type of success that Xavier Worthy can have at the next level.
And beyond
especially when you're not allowed to bump after 5 yards at the NFL level, which I think is huge for smaller guys.
Yep. And one more thing with him too, the gravitational effect that his pure speed has on the defense, even when he's not getting the ball. I mean, that alone can be valuable to an offense, right? So I think
at worst, he's like a Devontae Smith level player from not from, I think Devontae Smith is a more well-rounded player overall, but just from that gravity and the ability to be like a high-end number 2. I think Devontae Smith could be a number 1 if A.J. Brown wasn't there. But I think Worthy's like floor is a high-end number 2 at the next level eventually.
Nice. I agree. And I'm hoping, it's one of those things where, especially with the frame too, like you worry, maybe he gets a little easier jarred in contested situations too. So that might add another element to it. But, I do think the speed is worth betting on at the end of the day when you factor in the flexibility and the impact that alone can have on a defense for sure.
Yeah. Who is your number 4?
Here we go. All right. This top 4 group, man, I feel like
2, 3, and 4 were so hard for me.
Oh
it was so hard.
It was so difficult because all these guys. Here's the thing. All right, my number 4, Emeka Egbuka, Ohio State.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And this is a slight demotion from the start of the season, but that's not his doing, right? He was my wide receiver 2 entering the year. He's not my wide receiver 4. That is not his doing. I want to make that clear. Emeka Egbuka is still a fringe blue chip prospect for me. He hasn't been a dominating producer like we've seen, but I feel like every time he gets an opportunity, he kind of reminds us a little bit why he's such a highly rated receiver, even in Marvin Harrison Jr.'s shadow. This is a guy who is 6'1", over 200 pounds, right? You've got the frame density, you've got good proportional length. So he's got the build, right? And then as a route runner as well, every time we see him out there, man, I mean, the attention to detail, the spatial awareness with him, the twitch, the control, the flexibility as well, not only to cut stems, but also to bend as he's accelerating through zones and manipulating coverage. That also shows up on his tape. And I love the hand-eye coordination with him, especially when he's catching passes in stride over the middle of the field, things like that, on crossers and on drag routes. Like, he's a guy who very naturally flows to the ball. And I feel like that's a very valuable trait. We mentioned it with Xavier Worthy. You got to make those easy catches in the short and intermediate ranges, right? You've got to make those rack opportunities count. And Emeka Egbuka, to me, very sturdy hands, very natural hands, and that makes that matter. And then he's explosive. He's got good contact balance, good physicality. For me, he is what he was at the start of the season, right? And that's not a bad thing at all because he was already a fringe blue chip prospect on my board, a guy who's got the explosiveness, enough speed to stress defenses vertically, really good spatial awareness, detail as a route runner, and then the hands, the instincts, those are there too. So it's not really about what he has done or has not done. It's more just about what other guys have done. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But to me, Emeka Egbuka is still that guy who, especially with Puka Nacua finding so much success with the Rams, I feel like you can use Egbuka in a similar role. Just you let his versatility shine in an offense. It can be a movement Z. You can get him the ball on jet sweeps and motions, but he can play out of the slot too. He can play on the boundary if you need him to. I feel like that all-encompassing versatility is really what makes him such an enticing prospect. And it's a product of a very well-rounded profile. So nothing has changed for me for Egbuka in his evaluation, but some guys are really rising and skyrocketing in this wide receiver class, and it's so tough to rank them. But that's my wide receiver 4. Again, this is a guy that I would take early to mid first round. So we mentioned it early on. The top of this wide receiver class is insane, and I think we're starting to see that with how the grades are coming out here.
Yeah, and we again have a disagreement here.
Let's go. Dude, again, I'm not sure we've disagreed in like 8 podcast episodes.
I know.
So
this is what we needed. We needed a little bit of we needed a little bit of a battle.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think 2, 3, and 4 right now. Before I actually throw grades into the system and see how they all come out, it's just my personal preference. Watching a guy, what type of wide receiver do I like the most? And for me, Keon Coleman is at number 4 for me still, even with the dominance that we have seen from him at the catch point in the red zone, 6 touchdowns already. I mean, he has been unbelievable so far. My issue is when I put the tape on, I don't love, and this isn't necessarily his fault, I don't love the route tree that he runs at Florida State, and I don't love what I see from him as a route runner. I think that there are things that I like. I think that even Emeka stresses vertically better, and that isn't because, I mean, Keon's obviously 6'3" and he can win down the field. He's not slow, but I don't think that he has the speed to necessarily continuously stress NFL defensive backs. I don't necessarily think that's his game anyways. He is more of that alpha X receiver. I think that there are signs that he can become a much better route runner than he is right now. I like some of what he has done, especially, attacking leverages. It's just comes down to he hasn't really had the opportunity to show that he can run the full route tree like some of those other guys. And I prefer the route running types. So for me, he falls a little bit more in the current, but he might end up being there in the future if they open things up a little bit more in that offense. Also, we're going to have a discussion on Jordan Travis at some point, because I have not loved what I've seen from him later I say later in weeks, 2, 3, and 4 as much as I did in week 1. So Keon Coleman for me at number 4, even though, listen, we've all seen he is an absolute alpha at the catch point.
Yeah, for sure. And hey, there's a quick preview of our next QB checkpoint. It's coming next Monday. Shedeur Sanders and Caleb Williams are going to be battling this weekend. So we're going to have a lot of QB discussion. We'll have to throw Jordan Travis in there. This is a great segue because Keon Coleman is my wide receiver 3 right now. So, I mean, you mentioned it twice. We got to keep saying it. Like this 2 to 4 group, I feel like you could have them in any order, and I wouldn't disagree with you. I wouldn't argue it. Like, there's so much to like from this group. For me with Keon Coleman, and this is me personally. This is a personal thing for me as an evaluator. Sometimes I get burned by it. That's okay, right? Process over results, in my opinion, unless your results are terrible, right? Maybe then you need to reevaluate. But hey, if you got a trusted method and you like how you're doing it, right, then don't change it too much. But whenever I see building blocks from a bigger receiver as a route runner, I like to project those a little bit. And Keon Coleman, to me, does have enough flexibility. Is he just a Gumby like Marvin Harrison Jr.? No, but he is a guy who's flexible enough at his stems, right? And he's shown that he can press upfield and manipulate defensive backs' leverage. Like you said, it was a really great rep against Andrew Makuba out of the slot this past weekend, where he was feigning a post route. So he stressed vertically, then started inside, toward the hash, and Makuba kind of bid on it and went with him. And then right after he feigned that post route, he was able to use a really brisk swim move, and he cut that stem really efficiently laterally to the sideline, used the swim move to compound that separation, proactive targeted physicality. You love to see that. And then he made the catch inbounds, kept his feet in bounds, really good hand-eye coordination. So things like that, where he's using his space and he's also manipulating defensive backs into overstepping and then capitalizing on that. He's shown to me that he can do that for his size. The thing with Keon Coleman, it's just there's so many different ways you can use him. We don't always see him get to do that. We don't always see him get to work one-on-one because, hey, if you want him to just get open on a delayed release slant, he can do that as well. If you want to just, throw him a screen and let him be a rack threat with his contact balance and explosiveness and twitch, he can do that too. And hey, if you want him to go one-on-one vertically and win that 50-50 ball, that's one of the best things that he can do, right? So I think there's just so many different ways you can use Keon Coleman. We don't always see him get to work as an independent separator, as a route runner, the way that Marvin Harrison Jr. does on guys, right? The way that he just routes them up. We don't always see that. And I to your point, I agree. I think Keon Coleman can still improve with his route efficiency, plant and drive footwork at times. And he doesn't have elite flexibility for his size either. But I think there is enough where you can say this is a guy who can function as an independent X receiver, but then also be that guy who can win those 50-50 balls. That complete ball winner alpha mentality is very much there with him. And then a high level rack threat as well. To me, the 3-level framework is very strong with him. And then you combine that with the 6'4", 215-pound frame, the explosiveness, enough vertical speed to at least get a step and kind of toy with that leverage downfield, right? If you can at least get a step, that just minute amount of space alone can make the job harder for a defensive back who's trying to get into your chest, who's 3 to 4 inches shorter, right? At least. So there's a lot to like with him. Again, I think 2 to 4, any order is fine. But for me, what Keon Coleman has shown so far, having that alpha, that ball winner who can also function as a complete 3-level threat at the NFL level, it's a rare thing. It really is.
Yeah, no, I really like a lot of his game, and I wrote down that rep against Makuba. That was a good one. It's just something like, yes, I want to see that a little bit more. And it's tough because he just isn't used in the same way that guys like Malik Nabers and guys like Emeka Egbuka are used in that Florida State offense. So it's a little bit tougher to get a gauge on his overall game as a route runner. But we move on to my number 3, who is Malik Nabers, which means that Emeka Egbuka is at number 2, and we will get to that. Nothing has changed for me. This is the same order that I had in the beginning of the season. Malik Nabers is fantastic. He obviously had a huge game. Was that week 2 or week 3? I can't remember.
I think it was. It feels like it's been every week, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
he's been going off. I know he had Mississippi State. I think it was week 3. I want to
was
say.
that week 3? He had 2 or 3 touchdowns and was absolutely dominating. He's a fantastic receiver. I love his game. It's the physicality at his size is unbelievable. I'm very much and will always be team OPI. And he does it better than anybody. Listen, if you're going to get away from it, and especially at the college level with rules that you're allowed to be more physical after 5 yards on the defensive side of the ball, if they push, you pull. If they pull, you push. That's what he does incredibly well. And even when he's on those stopping routes, and this is something that I actually liked from Keon Coleman's game as well, on those stopping routes, even though Coleman isn't as quick to start and stop just because he's 6'4", 215 pounds. He doesn't stop as efficiently, but he is incredibly physical, and he uses defensive backs momentum against them to create separation in those stopping routes. Malik Nabers does that as well, but he does it at 6 foot, 190 pounds. And it's a lot of fun to watch because he is also a high level route runner and a legitimate X wide receiver who can take the top off of defenses. That's something that we definitely saw against Mississippi State. And he has that route running ability to win over the middle of the field. He is more creative than I think he's given credit for after the catch as well.
Oh, yeah.
For me, Egbuka and Nabers are tags touching incredibly hard for me to choose between, because although I like Egbuka's archetype a little bit more just overall, I think he's a little bit more QB friendly than Nabers or Coleman. I do think that Nabers has that ability to be an absolute dog at the next level. And it's going to be fun to see how it all shakes out at the end of the season.
Yeah, for sure. Now, real quick, the listeners can probably use process of elimination now. Yeah. So Emeka Egbuka is my wide receiver 4, your wide receiver 2. Like we said, this 2 to 4 group is incredibly close. It's really up to subjective opinion which one you choose. What gave Egbuka the nod over these other 2 guys for you to keep him at 2?
For me, he always seems to show up when it matters the most. And sometimes when it matters the most is when Marvin Harrison Jr. gets beat up. You saw it against Georgia when, Marvin Harrison Jr. had to miss time and it turned into the Emeka Egbuka show. And last week against Notre Dame, he had his best game of the season. That's big for me. He shows up when it matters most, when the competition is at its best. And I just love his game. I just look at him, what he's able to do in the slot. I see somebody who is a lot like Jackson Smith and Jigba, but a little bit more explosive overall. Not quite as big, not quite as physical, but 6'1", 6 foot, 205 pounds, 210 pounds, more than physical enough, more than explosive enough. And he is a professional route runner. My favorite thing about him is that he's not Justin Jefferson. He doesn't have that type of flexibility, but he is incredibly flexible. And in those secondary releases when he's playing, and he plays from the slot a lot. So in the college level, he's playing against defensive backs who are 7-8 yards off of the ball. And Justin Jefferson that was a knock against him. He played in the slot. He played against defensive backs, apexes that were 7-8 yards off the ball, outside leverage, playing a lot of quarters. And he was able to just really toy with them at the second level in those secondary releases. That's exactly what Emeka Egbuka does at a very high level. And he just consistently creates that separation. And I think good offensive coordinators are going to be able to find a way to get him the ball, 10 to 15 times a game. Obviously, he won't have that many catches, but he could have those, like you said earlier, Puka Nacua type targets, even as a rookie at the next level. I love his overall game.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't disagree with anything you said, man. That's a tough
I just
part.
wish he was a little bit faster. wish he was a little bit faster.
And he's not slow by any stretch. I think he has more than enough long speed to, especially when he's able to open up his strides in space. Yeah. That's when you really see that field stretching ability, not like vertically, I think more laterally, right? But opening those windows with that long striding ability, it's definitely there. And I think the 3-level framework, again, use that term a lot, but it's very strong with him. Before the catch, the spatial awareness, and not just the spatial awareness, but how he's able to weaponize it with those micro movements and that flexibility. I mean, and it's very strong. And then the hands are incredible. I mean, you mentioned it too. It's not just the hand-eye coordination, just the sturdy hands, but showing up when it matters most. That clutch gene, it's really hard to quantify, right? You don't know how to incorporate it into your grading sometimes. But when you see a guy like Egbuka have it, you don't overthink it, because you might give him an Xavier Worthy, and I'm sorry to dog on Xavier Worthy again because he's a phenomenal player, or another wide receiver who might not have the hands of Egbuka. You give each of them that opportunity on that long third down play, right? It's maybe going to be a contested throw, right? You want a guy that you can trust, and you can trust Egbuka. You know that. So to me, that's a very viable outcome to have my wide receiver 2. My wide receiver 2, however, just by a hair. And this is a guy who is tracking to maybe be a blue chip prospect for me. My grading scale works just 1 to 10, right? Over 9 is a blue chip guy. And Malik Nabers is trending there for me. He is almost there. I haven't finalized my grades by any stretch. We're not even close to that territory. But what we've seen from Malik Nabers this year has been phenomenal. This is a guy who's 6 foot 200. Again, he's got the size. We were talking about him. He was around 195 last year. And we were talking about him in the summer. The contact balance was insane, right? I mean, this is a guy who got the ball on screens and like short slants, right? And he's breaking successive tackles. He's resetting his feet. He's using his midsection to absorb contact, and just the physicality, the dog mentality. It is very much there with him. The rack threat element is very much there. But the way that we've seen him separate and convert catch points so effortlessly, so consistently this year, I mean, he is just toying with defensive backs. He's got a type of dynamism that is very hard to cover. I mean, the slot fade in particular has been the funnest route to watch from him this year. I mean, the slot fade, the way that he presses upfield into the stem and then just diverts laterally immediately and then is able to sear around them with that stacking speed, and then the coordination, right? It's so fluid. It's so effortless for him finding the ball and reeling it in after those reps. But, why is he able to separate on those? It's because he has elite explosiveness. His flexibility, his throttle control is incredible. And then he's got the speed to sustain that separation down the field. So, for me with Malik Nabers, I mean, you're looking at a guy who, we mentioned it with Egbuka, right? This is another guy who can manipulate defensive backs. He's got the hand-eye coordination to convert the catch point. So in that realm, you're seeing some similarities. But Malik Nabers, when you're thinking about how far a prospect can rise in the long term, in the forever realm here. I think Malik Nabers has the best foundation of explosiveness and speed, and speed kills in the NFL. I mean, look at the Miami Dolphins, right? Look at what they were able to do. So I think looking at that element of it, right? If I'm looking at two guys who can both manipulate defensive backs, who can both convert the catch point with their hands, who am I taking as a prospect to invest in? I would err towards the guy who's that elite explosive threat with the speed to legitimately stack defensive backs down the field, with the speed to stress vertically and find that separation and take the top off. But then also you get him the ball in the short range, and he's a high level rack threat as well. For me, there's very few boxes that Malik Nabers doesn't check. And then the physicality as well as a cherry on top. I mean, this is a guy who really relishes in contact and out muscling defensive backs and kind of proving that he is the guy. And he's done nothing but prove it this year. So for me, Malik Nabers, his game is so exciting. I do think that maybe Egbuka has a slightly more expansive route tree right now, but I think Malik Nabers has the ability to run any route that you want to with that throttle control, that burst, that targeted physicality as well. So, and then he's a high level catcher of the football, high level rack threat to me. For me, anyway, wide receiver 2, that's where he is right now. And I think, there's a very good chance that he can go early in round 1 next April.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all. The one thing I think that hurts, I mean, it's not going to hurt Marvin Harrison Jr. very much because he's going to be the first wide receiver taken no matter what. But something that hurts them is the quarterback play at Ohio State is much worse than it is at LSU. LSU's quarterback might have a little Josh Allen in him trying to get himself killed every once in a while when he's running the football, but he is a much better passer than what is going on at Ohio State. And hey, by the way, now,
real quick shout out to CJ Stroud, who's killing it over there with the Houston Texans, man.
He's playing well. I got to actually sit down and watch a little bit of his film because I wanted to see if it was real. And it's real. That dude is playing at an incredibly high level, and it's not what I expected after seeing that first preseason outing. So, number 1, his former wide receiver, or his former quarterback, Marvin Harrison Jr. is our number one wide receiver, and the generational phrase gets thrown around way too much when it comes to NFL draft prospects, but Marvin Harrison Jr. might be the closest thing we have seen to a generational prospect since Myles Garrett, in my opinion, because Myles, I mean, when you look at look at the entire package. Like, Joe Burrow was a fantastic quarterback prospect because he was so good at everything coming out. Like, you knew he was a professional quarterback, but Joe Burrow didn't have that, plus be 6'4", 230 pounds with a ridiculous amount of athleticism. Yeah. Like, if Joe Burrow and Josh Allen had a baby and they play, and that would be a generational prospect. That's what Marvin Harrison Jr. is. He is a wide receiver that is going to go out there and run a 4.3. He's unbelievable at all three levels of the field. Oh, and he happens to be 6'3", 215 pounds. He's a good blocker. Like, there's nothing that he does poorly. There's absolutely nothing that he does poorly. And he's a legacy. So it's just, this is a no-brainer. He is the best player in college football, in my opinion. I think that he is at a level higher than Caleb Williams, who people were talking about being the best quarterback prospect since forever. And that, in my opinion, is a little bit off. He's a fantastic prospect. Obviously, he is a freak of nature, especially when it comes to that creation ability, which we have talked about ad nauseum. But Marvin Harrison Jr. is different. He is the guy. That's all I have to say.
I mean, I don't know how much we can say that we haven't already said about him in previous podcasts. I mean, there's really nothing new to add. I mean, here we are. Welcome to the PFN Scouting Podcast, where we avoid hyperbole and then we come out with this, right?
yeah. Marvin Harrison Jr. is good. Crazy.
Exactly. Like, he's the best wide receiver. No, I mean, he's very good. I mean, if I'm going to try and avoid hyperbole, because I don't want to stack onto it, but I also, the only thing that goes through my mind when I watch him is, this guy's legit. He's near generational. He really is, for all the reasons you mentioned. 6'4", 205, right? Everything that we saw in the preseason, we've seen so far this year, and a little extra too. I think one of the few questions, maybe a couple questions, it was rack. Yeah. And he's shown that he can do that this year. You get him the ball in space. He's got that long strider speed to really expand those touches. And he's got some contact balance too, right? Is he going to bowl over guys? No, but he's strong enough. He's got that wiry strength where he can step through arm tackles if you need him to as well. So they've used him in motions. He's been more versatile with that too. So, he's shown a little bit extra there. And I think, speed for me was not always a question, but I wanted to see him stress defenses vertically a little bit more, just generate a few more big plays over the top. And he's done that this year too. I mean, that there was that one play, I can't remember who was against, maybe Youngstown State, where he's just out of the slot, runs a vertical route, and he dusts everybody. And, the moment they react to it in that zone coverage, it's like, oh, hey, I got to redirect. I got to trail him downfield. The moment you see him, it's too late, because he's running at that 4.3 pace with those long strides, and he's just an effortless athlete. It's like a gazelle in open field. I mean, he gains speed so effortlessly, and that's just as much a function of that vertical ability as it is a weapon as a route runner too. I mean, the explosiveness out of route breaks is absurd with him, but then the flexibility too, to channel that acceleration so seamlessly. I mean, you cannot combat this as a defensive back. Even if you're 4 to 5 inches shorter, you cannot combat this kind of thing, right? So I think when we talk about route running and separation and what the ultimate ceiling is for a wide receiver, we very rarely have we seen a wide receiver with the kind of ceiling as Marvin Harrison Jr. to win one-on-one against a defensive back. I mean, the way that he can bend, the way that he can accelerate, and then the attention to detail too, the micro movements. I mean, that's all there. The targeted physicality. He's like a pass rusher working against them at those stems, right? Using swim moves and rip moves to just kind of pry his way past when he doesn't win by sheer mobility. It's really special to watch a guy like this. And, just as a bonus too, this past week against Notre Dame, right? He had the ankle injury. He was on the play side as a run blocker, and he got rolled up, and he came in with a taped ankle later on. We were thinking maybe he's going to be out for an extended period of time. Nope, he's back on the next drive, and he's actually competing for some pretty difficult catches too. So the toughness, the competitive fire is there too. For me, there's very few boxes that he doesn't check, and I know we use that cliche often, but with Marvin Harrison Jr., it is true. He's still not only my number one receiver, my number one overall prospect in this class, and a near generational wide receiver prospect. All that much is true in my opinion.
Yeah, for me, I look at it as, do you have the, not just prototypical, but like special physical ability, and he has a special physical ability. His father is obviously Marvin Harrison Sr., who was pretty good in the NFL, if you guys don't remember him. And so you kind of expect him to be a decently effective technician. And then he's also a guy being coached by Brian Hartline, who is the best college wide receiving coach in maybe in the history of the world. I mean, the dude just produces NFL wide receivers, like high level NFL wide receivers. So everything came together for Marvin Harrison Jr. and he is one of the most special prospects that I have seen. And I just hope that he stays healthy for the rest of the season. That's all we got for the top 5. Let's get into some honorable mentions, and let's not even touch on prospect matchups this week because we don't have time. Who are some of the guys that you have to talk about? I'm going to bring up one right now. That is A.D. Mitchell. A.D. Mitchell, for me, is the guy who is going to be steadily rising. He's somebody who, again, 6'4". He's got a good frame on him. He's got fantastic downfield speed. He's really good along the sidelines. I like his sideline awareness. Just a guy who can do a little bit of everything. I think that the explosiveness out of his release, especially against guys like Kool-Aid McKinstry and guys like Terrion Arnold, guys who are freak athletes for the cornerback position, and he was able to blow by them a couple times. And not only was he able to do that, but he got a little bit out of sorts against Kool-Aid on a rep. And he was kind of falling over, and he caught his footing and just like a rocket shot out of his release and gained separation. Like that, he is a legitimately special athlete, and I am really excited to see how the NFL looks at him, after what should be a pretty good year for him in Texas. Now he's got to fight for targets with possibly the best tight end in the class and a top 5 wide receiver, if you ask me, in the class. So it's a little bit tougher to get targets, but he has been a fantastic weapon for them so far.
Yeah, he was the first name that I was going to bring up, A.D. Mitchell. I think, the size, flexibility, explosiveness combination that we've been talking about with so many of these guys is one that he has too. And the speed to get a step on Kool-Aid McKinstry, right? Kool-Aid's not a bad athlete. He's a near elite athlete, right? And he was still able to get a step, find that window down the field on the vertical plane. So, all those things are there. And on top of that too, he might be one of the best run blockers in the class. I mean, his highlights as a run blocker, dude is physical. He's tenacious. So another bonus for him. So A.D. Mitchell for me is definitely up there. They were both, him and Xavier Worthy were my top 2 runner-ups aside from Roma Duns, who I basically put there at 5B, right? So, that group, that cluster is very strong. A few more guys that, I think after that, there was a little bit of a dip off, but there's still a lot of quality wide receiver prospects, a few that I like that weren't quite in this range. Will Shepard from Vanderbilt is one that I've been high on for a little bit, and he had a really hot start to the year. Really good red zone threat with his ability to separate, 6'3", 200, really smooth athlete, really good body control and hands as well. So you like to see that, the sustaining acceleration through stems and kind of curvilinear acceleration, that's there on his tape. Slippery rack threat too. So, I could see him being a steal in the middle rounds next year. Malachi Corley, explosive rack threat. The dude's like 5'10", 5'11", 210 pounds, rocked up, really good contact balance, but explosive too. You get him the ball on crossers, on drags, and just let him go to work. And then there was a couple more that I wanted to bring up.
I got 2 more that I'm going to bring up real quickly. They both play on the same football team. It's South Carolina wide receivers, Juice Wells, who is unfortunately been hurt. So we have not really seen him so far this year. That's unfortunate. Even with a bad foot, scored a really nice touchdown the other week and then was seen on the sidelines pretty much fighting to get into the end zone after another South Carolina touchdown. As he was being held up by trainers, still in pads, which I couldn't believe. But the second one is Xavier Legette, who we have to talk about a little bit. That's a big dude who can move a little bit. Sure. He is big. He is powerful. I mean, he is practically a tight end. And that's not a negative thing. I think that those type of guys, that big slot, is being used a lot more in the NFL level these days. And if you are the requisite route runner, I think that you can be successful in that role. And I think that that's a role that he could fit really well. But he has that athleticism to play on the outside as well. He's fantastic going up and getting the ball.
Oh, yeah.
I wish that he was a little bit more consistent with his hands. There are some contested situations where I wish he would finish a little bit better. But he has been put out to dry a couple times. Some really tough catches, and he has been far and away the biggest weapon for South Carolina on the outside. It's been a lot of fun to watch him kind of elevate his game after Juice unfortunately got hurt.
Yeah, for sure. He's like, what, 6'3", 220? I mean,
he might be 230. I mean, he is massive. He is huge.
But then still, you see him accelerate. I mean, the dude's got turbo jets on his shoes. I mean, he just erases space. I mean, he will, if you're off man or if you're in zone like 10 yards out, like he will erase that space and he will surpass you and you won't be able to catch up. I mean, the speed and explosiveness for that size is really phenomenal. More of a vertically oriented guy. Looks like, I don't know if he has the flexibility to have a super expansive route tree.
Yeah.
But he can threaten vertically. Like you said, really good catching instincts, coordination, body control. The hands, sometimes they're a little bit late. Sometimes they're a little too wide, right? So you want to get him in the right position. I think he can be more consistent there. But a guy who's just, if you're looking for 6'3", 220 speed freaks in this class who also have really good acrobatic ability at the catch point, Xavier Legette is one of those guys. Good rack threat too, solid rack threat. I'll do two more from another singular team as well. Washington. We mentioned.
I was just about to go there. So good stuff.
Jalen McMillan. To me, I think he was injured last week, but I've always been a fan of his. Around 6'1", I want to say 190 range, but a guy who's explosive enough, fast enough, and just a really good route runner in my opinion.
He's just like one of those guys that you look at and it's like, that's just a solid wide receiver overall.
I want that guy as a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3. Like that's honestly what I'm thinking for him. I think, the flexibility and, the acute angle awareness on his route breaks. I mean, he can cut really tight angles inside. He's got really good hands too. So just a really solid receiver who I would be, circling in that round 3 range. If I can get him there, I would love that. And then Jalen Polk has been really good in relief for him. He had a big week this past week against California, but around 6'2", I want to say a little bit over 200. So he's got good size and he wears it really well. He almost doesn't look that big because he's so efficient, but he's explosive. Again, he's got good speed. And then for him in particular, the way that he can convert on those really tight catches too. Like he gets a step on guys, but then even when he's crowded, just having the coordination, the focus to reel that ball in, very impressive for me. I don't know if he has the route tree that McMillan does, but another guy who's explosive, really good coordination, focus, body control. So I'm looking at both those guys as guys who could potentially follow Rome Duns in that early round range.
And we brought up Malachi Corley, right? Because I don't want to get fired for not bringing him up.
We did. Don't worry, Ian. We're off the hook. We got him. We're good. All
right. So since we got him, we are good to go. We are out of here.
One more I want to bring up. Actually,
you got one more.
Brian Thomas Jr., LSU. Keep an eye on him.
Okay.
I don't know if he's going to be a top wide receiver, but the guy is like 6'4", over 200, and he had some really impressive plays this past week against Arkansas. So you're the SEC guy. I'll throw him over to you, but Brian Thomas Jr., looks like he could be a player. So that just goes to show, man, this wide receiver class, we can talk about the top guys. We can talk about the top 10, top 12. We're never going to completely exhaust our options here. There's a lot of depth. And that goes partly for the COVID year, right? That was a few years back, but also just, I think we're still in a golden age of wide receiver play, and it's not ending yet. So it's going to be a fun time.
Yes, it will be. I can't wait to talk about this class for the rest of the cycle. And I can't wait to get back next week. Monday, we will check back in with the quarterbacks. I think Thursday is a good time for another mailbag. I like getting questions in, and we can talk and answer questions forever. So I think that's a good idea. We'll do that. Have fun in week 5, guys. We didn't talk about any of the matchups, but that's okay. Go watch them anyways. Omar Spates is going to be playing against arguably the best running back in college football, Quinshon Judkins, who isn't having the best year from a production standpoint, but is a phenomenal talent. And always remember, guys, I love you. Goodbye.